Welcome to the Commerce Tomorrow podcast, your one stop to learn about the technology that's powering the future of commerce. Here are your hosts, Dirk and Kelly.
Welcome to another episode of the Commerce Tomorrow podcast. I'm joined by James Wiltshire, who is co-founder of a new SI called Gradient Edge. Welcome, James.
Hey, Kelly, how you doing?
For all of our listeners out there, James is quite famous in the ATG or Oracle Commerce community. Being an American, we always looked at James in product development as being this godlike figure. So it's great that we're able to get him on this podcast. I've been working with him for many years on many different initiatives, and like I said, he's really, really well respected. So thanks again for joining us, James.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks.
Maybe we can start by just talking a little bit about that old style of commerce platforms. We both came out of the same space and worked on a lot of the same technology. I certainly have fond memories of that old style of architecture, but maybe you can just walk through some of your experiences with that old style and some of the pros and cons of that architecture.
Yeah, sure. So I kind of got into ATG. I worked for a company in Belfast. We did email management, some kind of machine learning around that to do classification of that, and we got acquired by ATG. First got acquired by Primus, and then got acquired by ATG around 2004 or so, and got into the e-commerce space through that. It was really fascinating at the time. I was absolutely delighted to be part of that e-commerce world. ATG at the time were quite famous, and it was just really, really, really great because they were, there were so many famous people in ATG who, part of the original servlet spec and so on. And Dynamo was one of the kind of the earliest app servers, and Nucleus was a great IOC container, and Spring maybe wouldn't have existed if Nucleus had been kind of open source back in the day, but yeah, ATG was really, really, really great platform. So I worked there, and I kind of did a lot of the product dev stuff there, and some of the service products they had. So that whole architecture of commerce platform was fantastic, and it's brilliant to see the way it's evolved over the years. And the whole move to cloud that we're seeing now is just kind of fascinating to see. But back in the day, ATG was you couldn't hope for a better platform.
When you look back to, let's say, the old days, though it probably is not that long ago, but we are in a fast moving environment, and look forward to what are the challenges of brands, manufacturers, and retailers today. What are the limitations that you see on the platforms that had been rising up in the 2000s? So what are the challenges that they probably can't keep up anymore? As you already mentioned, that we are now getting to the cloud native environment.
Yeah, so back in the day when you had to build a commerce stack, it was a pretty simple decision to make. You went with ATG or WebSphere or Demandware, slightly more recently Hybris, lower end, Magento or Shopify or whatever. But it was a fairly clear cut, especially for any of the bigger commerce implementations you had to do. And it's fascinating to see now how they've all been acquired, and they've all formed part of these new kind of suites that the mega vendors have. It's just really, really fascinating to watch how that evolves, and the technology that's involved there. Most of those kind of have some form of, app server basis. Many written in Java, some in other tech on top of it. But it's all that kind of model of an app server with a fairly monolithic platform then on top. APIs weren't really part of the equation back then, because those platforms, they would do everything. They would have the kind of the web shop part built on top as well. But also they were fantastically extensible. So something like ATG, it was incredibly powerful and extensible, where you can write whatever Java code you want, and hook into that and layer stuff up with the configuration layering that you had, and similarly with Hybris and many of the others. But what you tend to see now is that model, it doesn't naturally kind of translate into what we kind of want for the modern cloud-based applications. Primarily because all of those are built around that concept, because they all have some form of app server at the core, and built on top of that, they've got things like the HTTP request, the HTTP session, kind of baked into the real core of what those things are, because they're all based around that of handling web requests. But yeah, the extensibility is absolutely fabulous, and that's maybe one of the Achilles heels that you see with some of the more modern platforms. But yeah,
I always liken the extensibility model to that of being a brain surgeon, maybe a little less qualified, but there's a whole brain there, and if you know exactly what little knob to electrocute, you can make the hand convulse in a certain way, and it's the same kind of thing. You need to have that very deep knowledge of all the different structures and how it was assembled and how it all works before you can make changes. But once you're in there and you have a good understanding of what you're doing, yeah, you're right, you can do just about anything you want, and that's quite powerful.
But I mean, the other side of that is that I think you touched on it there, but you have to know everything that these things can do, and all those platforms like ATG, Hybris, everything is so feature rich, and they kind of still sell themselves today on we've got this huge big slew of features, and why could you ever want anything more than these features, and everything's out of the box and just a few configuration tweaks. But the downside of that is you have to know where all of those features are, and you have to know that there's a configuration setting somewhere that you can tweak to get the behavior that you want. And then it gets to the point where there's something there that's out of the box, but it's not quite what you need. It does 90% of what you desire, but then there's that extra little 10% that you need to modify. And sometimes actually trying to get that 10% done, you would kind of be better off actually building that whole feature yourself than trying to just get that out of the box thing to work exactly the way you want, which is something we've kind of run into quite a lot.
Yeah. So we've seen a lot of these vendors offer these cloud offerings, and we're not talking just about ATG here, but just across the board. How far along are they, right? So there's clearly some marketing out there that says everything is now cloud, right? So somebody's waved their magic wand and, all of a sudden all these 20-year-old products are now cloud. But, realistically, how far along are we in that journey? And can you actually put these products into a real cloud offering? What's next?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I mean, we've seen that over the last few years, that everything is consolidated into the 4 or 5 mega vendors, if you will, of SAP and Oracle, Salesforce, Oracle, all kind of pulling those things together, and through various acquisitions, building out these kind of suites of products and so on. But they're all these old technology stacks that are now being rebranded as cloud. And sometimes you wish that they would spend as much on the technology of these things as on the cloud marketing that goes on to some of them, because I think there's just something that fundamentally it doesn't kind of work when you try and move those onto it. There's just a fundamental difference in how cloud platforms have to work. I mean, like I mentioned before, that thing around everything being based around having the HTTP session and the HTTP request kind of baked in at the core of it. That doesn't lend itself to how these things work. And there's a big one monolithic database underpinning all of them, some ORM technology to kind of give access to that. And I mean, lots of them now position themselves as API first. But if you look at what API first actually means, API first was kind of born out of the mobile first terminology. So when mobile really came to the fore, everyone in the design world decided that, yeah, okay, it makes sense. We have to design for mobile first. And then from there work backwards to ensure that the UI works for desktop and other forms. And the API first, kind of that moniker kind of came off the back of that somewhere as well. But API first really means you design your API first, and then you build the underpinnings, you build the technology to fulfill the contract that API defines. And all of the cloud vendors, all these mega vendors that have these legacy acquisitions that are now being rebadged as cloud, they all sell them as API first, and they use that as a marketing material. But they can't be, because these APIs have been built onto these kind of legacy platforms. So I'm not sure it's quite right that they should do that. And it's just a different way that you approach it. I mean, there's a lot of craftsmanship that goes into designing an API. And if you don't start from that way and work backwards, there are corners will get cut. I mean, what I see is that because these APIs have kind of been, duct taped onto these older platforms, you see evidence of that everywhere. They're acceptable APIs. They're good, but you see some of the underpinnings of the platform. They kind of leak through in various places, whether it's in the naming of some of the resources, whether it's in some of the properties that kind of leak through in the payloads from the APIs. But you can usually tell. Any developer who kind of knows APIs, you can look at these things and go, yeah, this isn't a designed from the ground up API. And the argument that you often see with that is, does it matter? API could be a little bit better, but it's probably good enough to get what you want done. And maybe that's true. Maybe it's not, but I think there's an awful lot of value in having those APIs that are really beautifully crafted and beautifully designed. It just lends to more extensibility over time as well.
Yeah, you're speaking out of my heart. Probably I have to tell everybody that this session here is not scripted, so we did not tell James what he has to say. So this is his free opinion, and he can say whatever he wants. So just that as a quick statement. Talking about API first, also the term headless is often used with that. When we quickly focus back on the desktop, on let's say more classical experience and e-commerce sites, what do you currently see? So do you build front ends then natively on top of the API? Do you integrate with a DXP? And if so, when do you choose what?
Yeah, so headless. So we've been trying to do headless for a long time. So back when I was CTO with Spindrift, we built some products along the way, and we had built a kind of a content management system. It was a bit more than just a CMS. It was very very tightly integrated with ATG, but it was a kind of a CMS, bit of kind of web content management. You kind of match it with the WEM, maybe a little bit of what you kind of now see as DXP, but really, initially that would be server-side rendered content tightly into ATG. But then over the years, we kind of moved that on so that we would actually serve up just the content via APIs, but on top of ATG. And we've been trying to move to headless for quite a while. One of the key things there that we were always trying to do was break that connection between the kind of the back-end development team and the UI devs. So we had a UI engineering group, and then we would have the kind of the core ATG commerce development group as well, and then a creative team that would work closely with the UI engineers. But part of the problem that you get there is that, especially with any server-side rendering technology, that there's always everything has to be munched together, and you're trying to deploy at the same time. So back-end changes have to be deployed at the same time as the UI changes, whether it's JSPs or whatever server-side rendering technology there is. And even if you try and split those apart and you package up the JSPs separately, there's still connections there, and it's really hard to break those. Whereas headless, it then just allows you for the UI teams to just innovate at their own pace. It breaks that dependency. They can build things as they want. They can test them independently. It just gives a lot of independence between that back end and the front end teams. And we've been trying to move forward on that for a long time to varying degrees of success. The technology wasn't really there, and it's really in the last couple of years I think that's turned a corner, both through the browser technology, the JavaScript frameworks that are available now. So it's really come on leaps and bounds in recent years. But yeah, just that ability of the UI team to innovate independently is kind of the crux of what you're trying to achieve with that. something behind the scenes. You still need a series of endpoints on the back end to actually fulfill the functionality that you need. And then you need some form of, be it CMS, WCM, DXP, whatever you want to call them, to actually control some of the content that feeds into that. So some of the content that you actually see on a site, if you take a commerce site, I mean, some of that content's going to come from the commerce engine, the products and the categories and collections and so on. But then there's always other ancillary pieces of content that you need. So they always had to come from somewhere as well. And then there's the other layer of, how do you aggregate that together? How do you put all of that content onto a page, or if you move to on mobile, or if you're driving apps, how did those pieces of content appear within there? So we've kind of been working on some of that stuff, but of course when we're with Spindrift and in the ATG world, we're just very, very tightly aligned to that. And sometimes we would just use our site builder product to define that content and define a richer kind of set of content that could flow through. And then sometimes you'd integrate with another third party. But I sort of see the model that there's today with the likes of Contentful and so on, the kind of that headless content that can be served up. I think that's really the way that everything's going to go. Some of the more kind of future-looking DXPs that are there. I mean, that whole terminology with DXP, you kind of lose track of how some of these acronyms all come together, because CMS, you've got the basics of content and workflow and versioning and internationalization, all that basic stuff that you need to kind of get stuff off. At some point, then that got rebadged as website experience management or web CMS or whatever you want to call it with that. And that's kind of when your channel concept or omni-channel kind of came into it. And now with DXPs, you see more of the, it's bigger platforms with analytics getting baked in, and the kind of the data flowing through it, and social, and always have ML and AI baked into that. But even then with DXPs, a core part of what seems to power those is, you need all the data about the customers flowing through there as well. And there's a big overlap with what you have in customer data platform and CDPs, and that single view of customer that needs to underpin anything. So there's a huge overlap between all of these technologies, and I think sometimes we can get a bit ahead of ourselves with some of just the acronyms we throw about with some of them. But no, headless in general, I think it's been a long time coming, and I'm absolutely delighted to see it really coming to the fore in the last couple of years. I'm really, you can see that there's a next generation coming now with progressive web apps and so on, and just the richness that you can have in clients now is really, really starting to kind of up the game again. So all the retailers that are there, I mean, so many of them have just been through this huge process of revamping their sites and getting sites to be responsive, and now they're all kind of looking at them going, oh my god, we've got to re-platform these things again, and our responsive side is out of date already, and now we need to be looking at these PWAs and getting more interactivity on the client. And it's a never-ending battle.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about front end. I'm seeing a lot of GraphQL out there these days. Would you mind just explaining to folks what GraphQL is in case they haven't heard? And then also just talking about how you use it, right? So how can the front ends consume it? How can API providers make it available? And do you see it replacing REST APIs or augmenting them?
Yeah, so GraphQL is great technology. So with GraphQL, you kind of have one endpoint that you access, and you tell it what data you want, and it will serve up all just that data and nothing else. So if you tell it you want product, you tell it what properties of that product that you want. You can tell it what you want the image that's associated with it, but just the URL of that image, and you can really chain together this rich graph of data that you want. So what this enables UI developers to do is it completely frees them from having to have any APIs on the back end. So they can, again, comes as part of what I was saying with headless, that you get the freedom for the UI teams to operate independently of back end changes. GraphQL is kind of the next level then of granting those teams independence in terms of what data they need to request from the back end to actually power that experience. So it's an absolutely fantastic technology. I remember a few years ago when that first came out, there was actually the trio of, was it GraphQL and React and Relay, I think at the time, all kind of came out together from Facebook. And I remember looking at it and just kind of reading and watching the initial presentations on that and thinking, this is really cool. This is real game-changing stuff. But it was the trio of those together where, with React, you get the beautiful componentized UI side of it. So you've got the functionality and the state and the display of all of that all together in one place, in one component that you can write. So that's a huge benefit for the UI dev as well. And then with GraphQL and with Relay, you've got this wonderful way for those components then to request just the data they need to flow through it. And with Relay, that incredibly powerful client-side caching to just request the pieces of data that you need and cache those on the client side as well. And it's Relay now has kind of been replaced a bit by, what was it, Apollo.js has kind of taken over for that kind of middleware piece of all of that. But it's so powerful, those ones together. But I don't think the GraphQL is going to replace REST APIs. I mean, REST APIs they're the bedrock of how every system should expose itself and should be used to integrate with things. I mean, I see GraphQL very much as an ancillary, as a kind of augmentation of what you get with REST APIs. So, I mean, GraphQL, brilliant as it is, I mean, it does have, it breaks a bunch of stuff as well. It doesn't really leverage what HTTP gives you. It breaks caching. You don't know things like content negotiation, language negotiation, conditional requests, a bunch of good stuff that's just there and layered onto HTTP and onto REST APIs. And I kind of get the feeling that GraphQL is much more tightly attuned to kind of obtaining read-only data, for actually rendering pieces of the UI. It's absolutely brilliant for just defining what you want and rendering that out. The whole the kind of the state change and the mutation stuff feels like a bit of an afterthought. It doesn't feel like it's quite as it wasn't really where the whole thing was designed for. But you get that wonderful kind of hierarchical data and strong typing, and you get the schema and everything that's there in GraphQL. I definitely think it sits alongside REST APIs, because again, with REST API, a lot of the stuff that GraphQL can do, you can do with a really well designed, really well implemented REST API as well. You can, you can define it with, so your resources allow all of your kind of collection resources to be queryable, through various query params. Allow kind of embedded resources to be added onto what you get back in the payload. Allow filtering to be done. So things like JSON API have some kind of standards for what those sort of queries would look like. But there's a lot you can do with a well-designed REST API, and it's probably not as clean and clear for the UI teams to pick it up and use. But there's a lot of good stuff you can have there. So I see, GraphQL very much as the ultimate API that UI teams can have, but it's kind of that thing that different APIs serve different use cases as well. And if you take REST APIs as the bedrock, GraphQL is that really, really tightly aligned with UI teams, and then maybe you've got other things like gRPC when you need that super high performance, low latency. I don't think gRPC is it's not gonna replace your REST APIs. It feels too much like moving back to that Corba world. Nobody wants to go there again. Yeah, right. But it's that thing of there's different use cases, and it's not like there has to be this one API pattern to rule them all. You always hear people, it kind of annoys me when you get that sort of should it be REST or GraphQL, and it's not really this versus thing we should be talking about. It's it's REST plus GraphQL, or maybe REST plus gRPC for some of the underlying stuff, or it should be this additive thing, augmenting it there. Lots of the things that you seem to get in things like GraphQL, you do kind of look and you think that, are people trying to reinvent what HTTP gives you over and over again? And you kind of wish that some of the devs would actually, really wish all developers would just understand that HTTP protocol a bit more, because there's a absolute world of really good stuff that's built out over the years into HTTP, but yeah, I mean, things like GraphQL, they do feel sometimes like they're kind of reinventing pieces of that. But yeah, I think GraphQL for that UI use case, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with your thinking. It's not an and, or it's more of a it's not an or thing. It's more of an and thing. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, but people come down to these religious discussions about it, and it's no, we have to use GraphQL for this, and yeah, we should chuck away all the REST APIs for that. And say, no, that's not what it's about.
Yeah, it's supplementary, and that's the thing. That's what always drives me nuts about technology is people have this shiny object syndrome a lot, where there's some new technology that has some promise, and it's the hype cycle, right? It's basically the Hartner hype cycle.
But that's all worse than the UI space is the worst in the world for that. I mean, when React came out, and then now you get the discussion between React or Vue or Angular or whatever, but that whole concept, people kind of lose track of that idea of just having that componentized UI model, being able to keep everything together in one place, and making them testable and then assemblable into bigger components. That's where the value lies. It's not that somebody's looking at which is the more popular one, and it's a popularity contest between these things. It's just choosing what's the best for the actual business problem you're trying to solve, and lose track of that a lot.
Talking about religion and technology, I have one other keyword for you. What about blockchain? Do you already see relevant use cases in e-commerce? Is it still also an early part of the hype cycle? And what do you think is coming there next?
Blockchain. I'm not convinced. I'm not a fan. I spent a long time over the last year or two kind of looking into it and really digging, trying to find what is the hype around blockchain, is this worth it? And I'm not there. Now I've got some really great colleagues and really smart people I know that are totally convinced that this is the next big thing. This is huge. This is really important. I'm just not totally there. I mean, it always seems to come back to that thing of every presentation, especially when it's applied to retail, and every presentation you see on blockchain for retail, it's goes back trying to save humanity from that looming existential tomato provenance crisis or spinach provenance crisis that's brewing in the world. And was it Walmart a couple of weeks ago had that one that they big loads of press around that, with IBM had written some blockchain solution for Walmart to do it was spinach and lettuce provenance and tracking. And then if you kind of followed the thread on Twitter, you found out that it was a private blockchain just hosted on IBM servers. Then someone had said, well, isn't that just the equivalent of it being a database? And well, yeah. It is. But so many of them just come back to that, of the problem you're trying to solve could be solved with a database. And the trust aspects and everything that's built into that, so many times it feels like a technology looking for a problem to solve and people just applying it in the wrong way. But what I do think is interesting around it is the whole area around kind of distributed apps, the sort of stuff that Ethereum does, and that kind of really trusting distributed app applications that can be built on that. Something interesting around that, but I don't think we've quite nailed down what it is yet. Also interesting to see that it was just quite recently that Tim Berners-Lee announced that he was now working on some new decentralized internet concept. But when you read into that, interestingly, he's not actually basing that, as far as I know, on blockchain technology. He said it's all being done on the existing fabric of the web, which is that was a kind of an interesting move. So yeah, I'm not convinced that blockchain is as worthy to be on the hype cycle, as far up on the hype cycle as it is. But I'm happy to be proven wrong and looking forward to be proven wrong in the next couple of years. And also, even with, it's important to look at blockchain separate from the cryptocurrency side of it, because I think blockchain as a technology is absolutely fascinating, and there's lots of problems that it can be applied to. But again, cryptocurrency in terms of commerce and so on, again, that hasn't really taken off the way that a few years ago people thought that it would either. So yeah, no, I'm definitely on the fence to wait and see with that one.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So let's probably switch topics and talk a little bit about yourself and your recent position and also what you are up next to. So you had been for a long time at ATG, then at Spindrift, and your latest role over there was CTO. How did that come, and what has changed? So, what was your role before at Spindrift? What has changed becoming CTO of the whole organization?
Yeah, I touched on it earlier, but I came to ATG via kind of an acquisition path. I did in university. I did first did electronics, and then some music, and then eventually settled on a computer science major, and then worked for a few startups, and then through acquisitions ended up in ATG, which was brilliant. So I was there for a fair few years, and then left ATG around 2007, I think it was, sometime around then, to kind of go out and just to see more of the client side of it, because up to that point, I'd worked for a bunch of kind of SaaS companies and product companies, and done some kind of little bit of services work, but I really wanted to get out and actually kind of work for clients and work for actually implementing these solutions. So I left ATG and kind of set up on my own and worked for a few companies. Initially, worked for a place we kind of built a mobile ticketing system, around the 2007 time, and it's a mobile ticketing system for buses that was based on QR codes being sent to phones, and there was an IoT aspect to that as well. It was an absolutely fascinating project. But looking back now, you can see that there's thousands of lines of code written for the messaging components of this that now you would do in an hour with a couple of Twilio calls. It's brilliant to see how that stuff evolves. So I'd done that for a while, and then I had hooked up with Spindrift. So Spindrift had been formed around the same time by a few people that were kind of ex-ATG themselves as well. And I knew some of them, but hadn't worked kind of directly with them at that point. And Spindrift had been set up to provide a kind of a better class of ATG implementer, shall we say. Back then, the ATG and commerce implementation market was full of these big offshore SIs doing these huge, big, multi-year waterfall projects that never ended well. So Spindrift was trying to do up the game with that and do something that really, really provided kind of outstanding commerce. So I joined up with Spindrift around then, initially working on some of those big commerce implementations across Europe. But I also had a bunch of kind of product development initiatives that I'd kind of wanted to kind of get off the ground, and we kind of joined with Spindrift, and we kind of joined forces on that, as well as kind of bringing some technical kind of stuff to Spindrift. We also kind of ended up setting up a product division within that I spearheaded. So within Spindrift had a pretty clear split between the services business and the product business, and they were very, very complementary and worked very, very closely together. But that kind of set us a little bit apart from some of the other SIs that were around at the time. So I was with Spindrift for just going on 10 years in the end before I kind of left recently. And over that time, I'd kind of worked as architect on a bunch of commerce projects. I'd been product director, kind of spearheading all of the product initiatives that we had, and then eventually, 3 or 4 years ago, took the CTO role. I've been kind of doing that. I've been kind of doing it for a long time before that, anyway. But it was really just kind of consolidation of titles and so on around the time that we got acquired. It was a fantastic company. I think we did some really, really good work, and it was an absolutely wonderful time there. Some really great people.
I've seen quite a few different SIs try to build products, but I think at Spindrift, you were able to build some pretty interesting products that actually worked. So you made ATG headless back in the day before it was widely accepted. A lot of people would So what are those guys doing over at Spindrift? That's crazy. Why would you make ATG headless? Isn't that the whole point? And then also you made it stateless, which was also very impressive for its day. Even to this day, it's still pretty impressive. How did you build products, and how did you make that a commercially successful endeavor? Because again, I've seen so many organizations try it, but their core competency as an organization is services. It's doing these implementations. How did you make the product side of Spindrift work?
Yeah, no, it's lots of people have asked that over the years as well. I think part of it was, the founders of Spindrift, they primarily came from some slightly technical backgrounds, but there was a lot of kind of sales background in there as well, and they were very focused on building the best SI, the best agency and consulting team that there was. And I think I brought a bit more of a product focus to that, because for the 10 years prior to that, I have been working pretty much predominantly on the product side of things for various companies, and kind of been through the ringer a bit with that, and had worked at many of the different aspects that you get around the product side of it. Kind of did some stuff to do with support, some around the kind of implementation of it, and everything like that, and the documentation that has to go around it and everything else. So I think I brought some of that, and I was lucky enough to recruit a couple of incredibly talented ex-colleagues along the way as well, to kind of help out with that brought a bit more of that kind of product background to the mix. So I think that was one aspect of it. Lots of the SIs you see that try to do this stuff as well, it is with people that have predominantly that consulting background. And I think having that kind of mix, that definitely helps with that. I even remember when I was still at ATG, there were a couple of engineers that I worked with, and I was always so impressed that there were a few engineers that had actually spent some time doing services work and kind of field work, and then they'd come back to the product, the R&D department, and those guys always had such a different view on how things should be implemented. So you get kind of some of the hand-wavy ivory tower architect types to say, no, nobody would ever want to change something like that. You don't need to make that extensible. And then the one guy who's kind of spent time with clients really solving business problems would go, man, I think we should make that extensible. That's actually a pretty important thing. And those guys were always right. But I think having that mix of actually seeing how that stuff works is just so valuable. So I think there was some of that back at Spindrift when we were trying to build stuff. And also we had a real focus on just trying to do what was right for the customer, solving real business needs. We built out the site builder was our kind of first product, our main product. There was no real CMS type product that was really tightly integrated with ATG. So we built that out, and we built that so it was full documentation set went with it. Third parties could take it and implement it. So we have third party SIs would actually take that and build it out as well. It looked like a real seamless addition to ATG. Now the constraints that we had on that was that it was in the world of ATG, so it was one of those kind of embrace your constraints sort of things that we had to just go down. But it was really just fulfilling a business need that was there. And then we get really detailed documentation around stuff. We built training courses around it. So that side of it was great. And then as well as that, we built out an accelerator. But again, just really solving, polishing off some of the rough edges that you had with the ATG platform, and doing some of the things that you needed to actually get it into production. And that was all based on feedback from lots of the services work and actually building these things out. So it's very much a virtuous circle that you get for pulling that all together. So now, and I think there's another part is just, you have to kind of focus on, there's lots of the little details that matter with these things as well. Little things like, how you manage the error handling, and actually, one well-written error message or one well-written log message can be the difference between, a support case being raised a couple of months down the line, or the developer who's actually working with your software being able to figure out, so because of that error, I understand what's wrong and I can fix it myself. So, and again, from just a pure consulting world, that doesn't really matter, because, consulting side, you just write the code and forget it and move on. It's not going to come back to bite you. But on the product side, you've got to be a lot more careful of that. And, So I think that was part of it, and yeah, I'd like to think lots of it was down to just the great team working on some of that stuff as well, and because we had the ATG background, we kind of worked through that. It always felt like we were always kind of running maybe a year or two ahead of what ATG were doing. Like with the we built out a really nice set of REST APIs on top of ATG because we kind of got fed up. We wanted these beautiful APIs. And there was always, a new API framework coming from ATG, but it never really quite fitted the bill. They weren't proper REST APIs, so we just built one ourselves, and lots of clients have ended up using that as well. And then the stateless aspect that you talk of, that was fun. Never got that one into production because it's just it doesn't get to the point where it could run in a sustainable way, in a productionized way. The REST API is used in production in plenty of places, but the stateless one is just too much of the underlying platform is just fighting back against you to make that viable for kind of usage at scale. But yeah.
That's a great success story that you had with Spindrift. And one other milestone actually was the acquisition, right? Can you quickly share with us when and how that happened and with whom?
Yeah, sure. So Spindrift, we were independent for many years. We got acquired by Publicis Group in 2015. So we've been working closely with LBI, which then became Digitas LBI, on a few projects before that. So we had a relationship there, and Publicis had acquired LBI a little bit before that. So they acquired Spindrift to kind of bolster their digital commerce capabilities. Because Publicis, you probably know Publicis Group are one of the big three or big four agencies, advertising agencies or marketing communication agencies, whatever they want to call themselves, alongside WPP, Omnicom, and so on. So they've all been transitioning into becoming more digital focused companies over the past while. So they acquired Spindrift to really bolster a lot of that capability. And then what happened along the way with that was shortly after Spindrift was acquired by Publicis that Publicis actually merged, and they acquired and then kind of merged with Sapient. So we're kind of thrown into the mix then of, you've got Publicis, Sapient, Razorfish. There's a lot of companies all kind of thrown into that mix then, and the politics got a little bit intense, shall we say. 3Share are in that mix as well. I know you've interviewed in the past as well, focused on the AEM side of things. So we acquired in 2015. We're kind of integrating for a few years, kind of left alone for a few years, and then we've kind of really gone through the integration of the last year or two. And now that's Spindrift. Everyone from Spindrift is pretty much dissolved now into that kind of wider Publicis and Sapient group.
So now you're co-founder of Gradient Edge. I understand you're going to be spending some time on machine learning and artificial intelligence. Can you just talk a little bit about Gradient Edge, and given all you've learned from your days with ATG and Spindrift, what are you going to be bringing to market? What's your unique value proposition at Gradient Edge?
Yeah, so we've just kind of co-founded Gradient Edge in the last month or two, and we're really trying to focus on two aspects. One is kind of building products, kind of next generation commerce products, or around the edges of what you need for great commerce experiences, and then providing consulting services for any organization that wants to really make a game-changing move with their commerce environment and help them move to the cloud. So we don't plan on just trying to do what lots of the other SIs are tied to SAP or Oracle or whoever, and we're not going down that road of trying to do those, because I don't think that truly next generation commerce. I don't think those kind of platforms are really where that needs to go. I think of the cloud vendors that are there. I mean, between AWS and Google Cloud and Azure, that's where the future of cloud is. And I think everyone will need to kind of move in that direction and kind of leverage up on those. I'm not convinced that those kind of mega vendors. It feels like a bit of a sideways move for anyone moving in that direction. So we're really trying to focus on, any organization that wants to be, really make a generational shift. And part of that, I think, is having a really strong underpinning of data platform to do that. I mean, you hear lots about AI these days, and AI is such a buzzword. I don't even really want to.
What does it even mean these days, right?
Use the term AI. You say AI, and everyone rolls their eyes and go, "Here we go again." But bad ways of thinking about AI is that whole thing. Data is the new oil, or Google have all the data and all that sort of stuff, or say AI, and everyone immediately thinks of monolith in 2001, and that doesn't help. But I really, really believe that there's a game changer underway in how we actually treat data, how the development process is going to work. There's a step change coming in how these platforms are actually built, and a big part of that is having this underpinning of a really, really strong data platform of everything that flows through the system, and then being able to surface that data in a way that you can have data science teams easily tap into that, and data science teams being able to kind of try things, try experiments, create new algorithms, move on from that, and then be able to get those into production really, really quickly. And I don't really think there's any platforms out there today that really have that. Lots of the kind of more modern commerce platforms that are there, have eventing very much as a concept at their core, but there's no really way to tap into those events and to kind of surface those to data science teams to hook into. And there's a huge amount of learning that has to be done as well. I think all developers that are there today, everyone needs to have at least a basic understanding of AI and machine learning concepts, and how that all kind of gels together. And then once you have a data platform and you can kind of data science teams make sense of that and try new things and try new algorithms, get new insights into data, provide ways to optimize things, you then need a way for that to be exposed in a way that it can get back into the development teams and used and consumed really quickly. And that's where it feels that there's a bit of a gap there at the minute. So we're trying to work in that area to try and pull some of that together. It's just that huge learning gap, and then that huge data platform gap, I think, is something that we're trying to do some stuff in that space. And again, when you see all of these kind of suites of products being assembled by those mega vendors, that they are all separate systems, and the separate kind of systems of record for each of the the acquisitions that have been pulled together there. And there may be some data flow that's common across them, but I don't think that you necessarily get that with those vendors.
No, wait, you're kidding, right? I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
But when you see with, the amount of investment that Google and Microsoft and Amazon are making into the kind of the data tooling that you now get as those kind of three main clouds, you can see where that's all starting to evolve to. And those kind of data pipelines and everything like that is, I think the move from where we are today with APIs is fantastic. But I think we're going to see a move more and more into events being a kind of a first class construct we need to build it around, being able to tap into those event streams, and then having data science teams being able to kind of tap into that and make sense of that, and all the kludgy stuff today that you're writing ETL pipelines before data science teams can actually make sense of it. All of that has to be abstracted away. So it's actually, I think it's going to be really hard. It's really hard to retrofit that kind of engineering and data science culture onto a legacy business, and that's why you see lots of new entrants really able to kind of disrupt some of that space. Best example I have of that is if you look at what Stitch Fix does. Stitch Fix have an absolutely wonderful site. If you go onto the Stitch Fix site, there's I think it's Stitch Fix algorithms or something like that, where they show everything, where they use data science and where they use data to power the platform. And they're obviously one of those kind of new digital native brands who built everything from the ground up. But I think they're a glimpse into the future of how this will work, where they have data underpinning everything from optimizing the supply chain to the product selection to the actual products that are created, to what gets shipped to the client, to what impacts on the UI. There's that end-to-end use of data to really augment customer experience and internally the employee experience to be able to kind of surface the right stuff. So I guess who we would know as kind of merchandise in the more common commerce sense. So I think there's a big gap there. We're focusing on trying to build out some stuff around that space. So it's early days. We're trialing a few concepts and working with a few clients to build out a few machine learning things, and of course just doing some of the services work to kind of help places transition into these more cloud-based businesses. So fingers crossed as well.
Yeah, well, we look forward to staying close to Gradient Edge and all the work you're going to be doing there. So again, thanks for taking the time. We've come to the end of our podcast. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us. And we'll certainly be in touch. Look forward to following you.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Dirk. Great talking to you.
Thanks.